Hi, my name is Fran, and I'm going to be speaking to you about stop motion animation and explain the techniques and development of stop motion animation. The first technique I'm going to speak about is persistence of vision, which is basically a theory that states the human eye always retains images for a fraction of a second longer than when we've just seen it. This actually means that what we see is actually a mix of what we just saw a fraction of a second ago, mixed with what is happening around us now. Persistence of vision is very important because it stops the whole world going pitch black every time we blink, because we are still seeing what we just saw. Whenever we see a sudden flash of light or light hits our retina, our brains actually retain that light for up to a tenth of a second after we first saw it. This works in the real world. For example, when we go to the cinema to see a film, we know that motion picture creates an illusion of movement by flashing individual photographs very quickly. The second technique I'm going to speak about is stop frame, which is when the movement of an object is captured one frame at a time with physical objects that are moved one frame at a time. So when you play back the images rapidly, it gives the illusion of movement. You can see this if you look at certain stop frame examples from it or the Morph program made by Aardman Productions. My third technique to explain is frame rates. The number of images photographed per second is referred to as the frame rate. These are measured in frames per second. The theory or idea is that the more images taken per second, the more accurately motion can be seen. So if the frame rate is too low, then the images being shown will appear to be jumpy and bouncy, and your mind will no longer believe that what you are seeing is realistic. If you play back frames at different speed to how they were first taken, you can create effects such as slow motion and time lapse. The last technique is movement of models. It's a technique to show how models, whether they be clay, wire, plastic or plasticine, move from A to B when they are being taken images of. This could be you moving them lightly with your hand after each image is taken, or using invisible string to move it. As long as it looks discreet and realistic, you can move it in any way you want. I'm going to speak about how these pioneers and developers helped to create the techniques we have today and how each person individually developed each technique. So, with the persistence of vision, firstly, the pioneers that started to exploit the first technique, persistence of vision, and made it possible for us to use it as freely as we do today were, for example, Joseph Plato, who invented the phanetoscope, which is basically the first invention that created some kind of illusion of vision and motion when used. The phanetoscope was a very simple but innovative invention that consisted of two discs mounted on the same axis, and when spun it gave the illusion of the images taking motion. Obviously, his invention then gave future developers the stepping stone to explore this idea of moving image further and obviously made further breakthroughs. The next pioneer who explored the idea of persistence of vision was William Horner. William Horner worked from the same principles as Plato and made another invention along the same lines as the phanetoscope. He created the zoetrope, which was basically an improved version of the phanetoscope. This invention also meant when you spun the disc faster and faster, the more fluid the images you would see would be. This always corresponds with frame rate and fluidity of motion. The third pioneer is Emile Reynaud, who created the Pranaxoscope, which was an animation device, which developed from the zoetrope. It used strips of pictures inside of a spinning cylinder. It was basically an improved version of the zoetrope that used mirrors instead of tiny slits to make it look less stationary. This also relates to the technique persistence of vision, because it is using the images and the mirrors to create a more fluid illusion of motion. The final pioneer who developed an invention based on the persistence of vision technique was Edward Muybridge, who is most famous for his famous collection of the images of the running horse, which he was actually hired to do to see if it was possible to capture a horse galloping to see if all four of the horse's feet touched the ground at any one point. And when Muybridge did this, it turned out it was true. The horse's feet did touch the ground at the same time. Willis was a special effects technician and created some of the world's most famous cinema images, but this was only possible because of the first set of pioneers such as Joseph Plato, who created the first example of motion animation. Next, there's Ray Harryhausen. Harryhausen also worked very closely with Willis, as Willis was sort of a mentor to him. He produced some of a really great selection of fascinating cinematography, working with the technique stop frame and stop motion, also known as dynamation. He used stop frame and stop motion to create some of the most famous films we know today, such as Clash of the Titans or Mighty Joe Young. Finally, Jan Svrangmeier, who classed himself as a surrealist animation producer, who would have also used stop motion and stop frame animation to create his surreal, almost scary animations. He would have used examples of work from pioneers such as Muybridge, as he was the first pioneer to create an animation using a collection of images sped up to look like it was a motion picture.